Another quick screencast to help capture some of the ideas that we've been developing through our reading and class discussions. Remember that we've read in the textbook pages 190 through 196. So you have the textbook reading to look at. You also have handouts that are posted in Schoology, chapter outlines, and we have fairly extensive class notes. But just to recap, remember that Jesus is born in Judea in the year 4 BCE, so during the time of Octavian Augustus's reign as Roman emperor. He's born during the Roman occupation of Judea. So the Jewish people in Judea are living under Roman oppression. Moreover, the Jewish tradition, Jewish history, is the history of suffering. And they have many examples of suffering and oppression in their history, not the least of which was the story of Moses freeing the Jews from slavery under the Pharaoh in Egypt. To be Jewish was to also be very careful to keep God's law with certain Jewish dietary rituals, certain Jewish, the Ten Commandments, for example. In other words, there was a very clear understanding of how to be Jewish, very ritualistic, very much steeped in the history of Judaism. And that's very important for later on. Into this tradition, Jesus is born. He's born poor and Jewish and humble, like most Jews in Judea at this time. At the time in Judaism was a belief in an apocalyptic vision of the future. In other words, many Jewish people believed that God would one day send a Messiah to earth to help relieve them of their suffering and rescue them. And Jesus, one of Jesus's teachings was that he was that Messiah. Jesus also had taught quite a bit about the kingdom of heaven was attainable to you, the persecuted, by believing in him as the Messiah, believing in him as the Son of God, and also living a good and moral life, being dedicated to the idea of human rights. And this is Jesus' teachings. These are a fundamental cornerstone of the religion that is to become Christianity. But remember, at this time, Jesus is Jewish and operating fully within the Jewish tradition. We also have to keep in mind the idea that Jesus is seen by many as a divine figure. And the stories, what we call the Gospels, tell of his characteristic as a divine figure, meaning the Son of God. Some Gospels say that he was God himself. But more overall, we need to keep in mind that Jesus is saying, have no God but God. In other words, don't worship the Roman gods, worship the Jewish God. Keep faithful to your belief in that God and practice a good and moral life, and the kingdom of heaven will be yours. Which is very appealing to people who were living in Judea at the time, because it's not exactly the easiest existence, coupled with their tradition of the Messiah, the apocalyptic vision for Judaism, the Messiah. After Jesus is executed, right here, after Jesus is executed by Pontius Pilate as a threat to Roman stability and Roman rule in the region, his followers carry on in what we call an apostolic tradition. His apostles go on to continue to teach and preach the message of Jesus, among them being Peter and Paul. And Paul is significant because Paul has a particular vision for the Jesus movement that actually begins a split from Jesus followers, a split of Jesus followers from the Jewish faith. Paul says a number of things about being a follower of Jesus. One of them is you must believe in Jesus as the Messiah. Number two, you don't have to worry about Jewish historical traditions that have come before. Circumcision, dietary restrictions, and these sorts of things don't matter. What matters is belief in Jesus and keeping and practicing Jesus's moral teachings. And this is not okay with some of the Jewish people who follow Jesus, particularly the hierarchy within Judaism, the rabbis. because, say, if you don't have to really worry about all the Jewish history that's come before, you really kind of erode what it means to be Jewish. So Paul's vision for the Jesus movement starts to splinter and separate the Jesus movement away from Judaism. Additionally, Nero, when Rome burned in 64 CE, he blamed the Christians, or at least the followers of Christ, and punished them for it. In 66 CE, Jerusalem revolted against Roman rule, were crushed, and many Jews sold into slavery. These two events back to back said to a lot of the Jewish people, well, if the Messiah is here to save us, if Jesus is the Messiah, it's not working out. In other words, he must not be the Messiah. Jesus has come and nothing has changed. So that further generates a split between Judaism and Jesus followers. This really is where we start to see the establishment of a church we call Christianity. Not just a following of Jesus within Judaism, but a church called Christianity. So here we see a change, an evolution in what it means to be Christian, from going from a Jesus follower to the establishment of a church. And with the church comes bishops and doctrine and orthodoxy, which means a right way to believe, and heresy, which means a wrong way to believe. And so we're starting to see the rituals and beliefs and practices of a full-blown religion now. So again, we're going from a movement within Judaism to a full-blown establishment of a Christian church. Remember, this is what you're trying to think about for your DBQ. How does Christianity evolve and change over the centuries? The last thing we want to talk about here, we haven't talked about this yet in class, this will be new to you, is an offer from a man named Pliny. And Pliny was a governor in a Roman province where there were a number of Christians practicing their Christian beliefs. And remember, Christian beliefs would preclude worshiping Roman gods. So this is a problem. And Pliny says to the Christians, and says, look, if you renounce your Christianity, and if you sign a document pledging that you do no longer believe in Christ as Messiah and God, and you sacrifice to the Roman gods, and basically get in line with what it means to be a Roman, I will spare you. If you don't, I will execute you. And many of the Christians he offered this to said, okay, we are not going to renounce Christianity. We understand that we will be executed, and then they were. And this is a beginning really of a tradition of martyrdom within the Christian church, dying for your faith. And again, remember, the original martyr is Jesus himself, right? The original martyr is Jesus himself. So this is a sort of a quick summary of what we've been talking about so far, about what's going on in the development of Christianity. And again, remember that your DBQ is to track and trace the development of Christianity, both as an historical and religious movement through the years. So this is a quick summary of what has been happening.